They said it was sacred, a gift from the gods, a plant whispered through the smoke of ancient temples, a doorway to the divine, a tool of prophets, shamans, and sages. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The rituals faded, the reverence dissolved, and the portal turned into a pastime. Today, it's legal, recreational, glorified, but no one is asking the real question: what does it do to the soul? Because this plant doesn't just relax the body, it opens something far deeper, and not everyone is ready for what it reveals. They told us it was sacred, a gift from the gods, a plant of peace, a teacher of truths. They said it opened the heart, opened the mind, opened the doors. But no one told us about the other doors, the ones that creak in silence, the ones that open not to light, but to reflection. Before smoke-filled apartments, before rolled joints passed hands in parking lots, before legalization, legislation, and the slow dance of cultural rebranding, there was a fire, and there was a leaf, and someone, somewhere, touched them together for the very first time. The flame kissed the plant surrendered, and from that alchemy rose smoke, not a puff, not a party trick, but a presence. The ancients didn't use words like high. They didn't seek escape. They sought entrance into something deeper, something unseen, into the marrow of the soul. To them, cannabis wasn't a pastime. It was a portal, and a portal, by nature, opens both ways. We imagine the first to inhale it alone under a canopy of stars, feeling their body slow, but their vision sharpen, hearing the heartbeat of the earth, touching silence for the first time, feeling watched, not by gods, but by the self. The plant did not promise ecstasy, it promised exposure, and that was its holiness. There were chants, there were fasts, there were nights spent in stillness, waiting for the plant to speak, because cannabis didn't talk loud, it whispered, and only the still could hear it. But with time, the temple shifted. Stone walls were replaced by television screens. Silence became playlists. Reverence became routine. And what was once sacred was slowly repackaged as sensation. We lit the same plant, but in a different room, in a different way, with a different intention. Not to meet ourselves, but to forget. We asked it to open the same door, but we no longer knocked. We kicked, and something on the other side answered. Because every sacred plant is not just a gift, it is a mirror. And mirrors don't flatter, they reflect. So the question begins here. Not what does cannabis do, but what does it show? And more importantly, are we ready to see? Because this isn't just about a plant. This is about a path walked by millions, blindfolded. And now, the blindfold burns. They said it was just a plant, a leaf, a stem, a scent wrapped in nostalgia and rebellion. But what if it's not? What if that humble green curl isn't a substance, but a structure? What if it's a gate? We walk through it so casually, light, inhale, smile. And yet, every act of fire, every breath drawn, is a key turning inside something far older than we imagine. This is not kale, not chamomile. It doesn't just calm, it calls, not outward, but inward, to corners we've left in shadow, to memories we buried under convenience, to wounds we wrapped in logic and forgot to feel. Because cannabis is not a tool obeys, a tool waits. This question mark, This reflects. It does not give us visions. It hands us a mirror and asks us to look, not at the world, at ourselves, at the cluttered attic of our inner house, the broken frames, the locked rooms, the drawers we never dare open. And that's why some laugh and others cry, why some float and others fall. Because the plant doesn't create emotion, it amplifies it. It doesn't hand you clarity, it shows you your fog. And in that moment, you realize this isn't about the plant at all. It's about the person holding it. The ancient mystics knew. They didn't smoke to escape. They smoked to descend into the cavern of the soul, to walk barefoot through memory, through archetype, through dream, with rituals, with chants, with silence. Because a mirror without preparation doesn't show truth. It shows distortion, and distortion without grounding becomes a spiral. That's why the same leaf can bring wisdom or paranoia, peace or restlessness, insight or illusion. The plant is neither saint nor sinner. It is neutral. It waits for your intention, then magnifies it. If you bring reverence, it deepens. If you bring fear, it intensifies. If you bring numbness, it mirrors back the void. This is why the temple matters. The space, the silence, the readiness. Because a portal is not a playground. You don't enter it with noise. You enter with stillness, with respect, with discernment. So maybe the better question isn't, should I use the plant? Maybe the question is, am I ready to see what it reflects? Because behind the smoke, behind the relaxation, behind the cultural aesthetic, is a threshold, and some doors, once open, do not close quietly. Before rolling papers, before dispensaries, before neon signs flashing 420, and bobbleheads blowing smoke on TikTok, there was a temple. And in that temple, cannabis wasn't smoked, it was offered. Burned slowly, like incense, a whisper of scent curling into the rafters, as chants hummed in the bones of stone walls. It wasn't lit to escape, it was lit to summon. In the Atharva Veda, one of the oldest texts in India, cannabis was called one of the 5 sacred plants, a divine gift, a bearer of Amrita, the nectar of immortality. It wasn't recreational, it was ritual, a bridge between Shiva, the destroyer of illusion, and the ascetic sages who walked barefoot into the fire of consciousness. These mystics didn't spark up at parties. They fasted, they chanted, they sat for hours in silence, the clay chillum resting between their fingers, like a torch passed from the gods. To them, the smoke wasn't smoke, it was offering. In Taoist China, records from ancient alchemists like Ge Hong describe formulas combining cannabis with ginseng and other sacred herbs. Not to get high, but to dream lucidly, to unlock astral temples in the mind, to stretch perception past the physical into the realms of immortal insight. These were initiates, not influencers. They didn't just use the plant, they prepared for it, because they knew a key in the wrong lock can break the door entirely. In medieval Sufism, especially in the branches tucked into North Africa and Persia, hashish wasn't taken for pleasure. It was taken with prayer, with poetry, with surrender. The goal was Fana, the annihilation of the ego, to dissolve into divine presence. Mystics would gather beneath moonlight, reciting verses of Rumi, feeling the veils thin with each inhalation. But even Rumi warned, why seek God in drunkenness if he already dances sober within you? It wasn't the substance, it was the space, the ritual, the container, Even among the ancient Hebrews, though the word cannabis doesn't explicitly appear, some scholars, like Sula Benet and Raphael Mechoulam, suggest that cannabism, a fragrant element of Moses' holy anointing oil in the book of Exodus, was likely a reference to cannabis resin. If true, then the sacred oils of the high priest, used to bless temples, kings, and prophets, may have carried the psychoactive essence of the very plant now sold in plastic bags on street corners. This is the forgotten temple, not a building, but a way of approaching the sacred. Cannabis, in its origins, was not inhaled in chaos. It was invited in ceremony. The silence before, the breath during, the integration after. Today, we light joints in bathrooms and scroll feeds. Back then, they lit the plant beside altars and watched visions rise with the smoke. So the question isn't whether cannabis is sacred. It always was. The question is, have we forgotten how to meet it? Because when the temple is gone and only the ember remains, we risk mistaking ashes for the flame. They say it was Shiva who first breathed it in, not in rebellion, not in escape, but in sacred solitude, beneath a crescent moon, wrapped in ash and silence. In Hindu cosmology, Shiva is not a god of gentleness. He is the destroyer, the cosmic dancer whose rhythm dissolves illusion. He doesn't coddle, he confronts. And through destruction, he clears the path for truth. And it is Shiva, Lord of Transformation, who is most intimately connected to cannabis. In the sacred texts of India, the Shiva Purana, the plant is said to have sprouted from the earth, where drops of Amrita, the nectar of the gods, fell during the great churning of the ocean. From that soil emerged Bhang, a preparation of cannabis leaves, used in offerings to Shiva himself, but not as a drug, as a sacrament. Today, across the Indian subcontinent, the wandering ascetics known as sadhus still carry the torch of that ancient practice, their hair matted like roots of the earth, their bodies smeared in holy ash, their minds pointed only inward. These are not stoners, they are seekers, and their relationship with cannabis is not one of indulgence. It is one of annihilation. The annihilation of the ego. During long meditations in mountain caves or temple steps, the sadhu lights the chillum, a traditional clay pipe. He breathes in not to get high, but to burn away identity, layer by layer. Each puff is a funeral pyre. Each exhale a letting go. They chant Bom Bom Bole, invoking Shiva, as the smoke curls like sacred script across their foreheads. The plant is their mirror. It reveals the attachments they must burn, the illusions they must dissolve. And yet, even within India, not all agree. Some gurus warn that cannabis, when misused, doesn't dissolve the ego, it inflates it. That without proper fasting, chanting, silence, the plant becomes a distraction, a hollow mimicry of transcendence. Swami Sivananda, one of the great modern saints, cautioned against relying on any substance for spiritual growth. God is not in the smoke, he said, but in the stillness behind the eyes. Still, for the sadhus who have walked away from society, who have renounced possessions, names, and even families, cannabis remains a companion, not for comfort, but for confrontation. They say when you walk alone into the Himalayas with only the wind and your own mind, the plant teaches you how to die before your body ever does, not a high, a death, and from that death, rebirth. It's a rite the modern world cannot package, a journey that cannot be streamed. Because this isn't about cannabis. It's about the sacred posture we hold before it, the discipline, the devotion, the divine madness that turns smoke into a staircase. They told us Shiva breathed it in, but they forget to mention he did so only after dissolving the self into nothing but flame. In the stillness of ancient China, where mist wraps around mountains like whispered prayers, where silence holds more truth than speech, there lived the alchemists of the Tao. They did not wear robes of gold. They were not seekers of wealth or fame. They were seekers of the eternal breath, of immortality, but not the kind written in marble or myth. Rather, the soft, radiant kind that lives within a body completely attuned to the currents of the universe. And among the scrolls, among the powdered roots and powdered pearls, there was a name, spoken with reverence and caution: cannabis. In Taoist tradition, this plant was never seen as poison, nor as pleasure. It was a herb of vision, a key to inner portals, but only if the lock was already prepared. The Taoist sage Ge Hong in the Baopuzi described recipes that mixed cannabis with ginseng and resin of fir, used to provoke lucid dreams, visions of the celestial realms, and communication with immortals. But there was a warning hidden in the margins. If the body was impure, if the mind was unstable, if the chi, life force, was chaotic, the plant wouldn't open the heavens, it would open the shadows. In Taoism, every element carries a vibration, every substance a frequency. Cannabis was believed to amplify the chai of the user. If your energy was harmonious, the plant could extend life, bring prophetic dreams, even enhance the subtle senses. But if your energy was scattered, it would fragment further, like tuning an instrument too tight, until the strings snap. The alchemists called it the mirror herb, because it doesn't add, it reflects. Used with precision in deep meditation, after long purification. It was an elixir, used casually, recklessly as a shortcut. It became a poison, and not the kind that kills the body, the kind that numbs the spirit. In modern language, we might say it affects the endocannabinoid system, touching mood, perception, pain, memory. But in Taoist alchemy, this was simply the dance of yin and yang, moving too quickly, spinning before the body was ready. And so they warned, this is not a leaf to be burned in boredom. This is not a tool for the impatient. Cannabis may expand your perception, yes. But if you have not first grounded yourself, it will also expand your illusions. What good is seeing the stars if you no longer know which way is up? So the masters, when they did use the herb, did so only after discipline, after silence, after fasting, not to chase visions, but to receive them. Because in Taoism, the body is not just a shell, it is an altar, and the plant, if respected, becomes incense to the divine. But used carelessly, without alignment, without humility, it becomes smoke that clouds, rather than clarifies. In the quiet chambers of the Taoist adepts, they say one thing more. Don't mistake movement for progress, and don't mistake expansion for awakening. Because cannabis, like fire, can warm the soul or consume it. There is a silence that comes not from absence, but from the unraveling of identity. And in that silence, the mystics listened. From the winding alleys of medieval Persia to the dervish circles under crescent moonlight, the Sufis danced, not for performance, but for disappearance. They called it Fana, the annihilation of the self in the presence of the divine. And sometimes there was smoke. Hashish, in certain branches of Islamic mysticism, was more than substance. It was seen as a veil remover, a sacrament not for pleasure, but for piercing through the illusion of separation. It was said to dull the voice of the ego just long enough for the soul to whisper. But not all Sufis agreed. Even in the mystic's house, there was caution. There were walls built not from rules, but from reverence. Some, like the ecstatic wanderers of the Kalandariya order, embraced the herb in their sacred rites. In the dim glow of lantern-lit gatherings, they would chant the names of God, inhale deeply, and spin into themselves, seeking obliteration not in the body, but in the boundaries of the self. For them, the plant was a bridge, a rope lowered into the abyss. But even a bridge can collapse if walked blindly. Rumi, the beloved poet of the soul, offered a warning wrapped in velvet. Why seek God in drunkenness, he asked, if he already dances sober within you? Rumi was not condemning the plant. He was illuminating the danger of the shortcut, that anything which becomes a crutch, no matter how sacred its origin, can become a prison. He knew the intoxicated mind could mistake flashes for the sun. That ecstasy, untethered from devotion, was just another trick of the ego. And it is here the real lesson of the Sufis takes shape, because for them, hashish was never the teacher. It was a door, and not all who entered returned with wisdom. Some returned disoriented, entangled in illusions mistaken for insight. The mystics knew that not all visions are revelations, that light can blind as easily as it can guide, and that a seeker without grounding is like a candle in the wind, beautiful, flickering, and easily extinguished. Even the mystics, who saw the face of God in everything, treaded lightly. They fasted, they prayed, they wept on worn rugs for hours before daring to alter the veil between this world and the unseen. Because to knock on the door of the infinite while intoxicated with self was to be devoured, and perhaps that's the real essence of Fana. Not a high, not a thrill, but the sacred destruction of the illusion of control. The plant, like all sacred tools, asks a question before it opens the gate. Are you here to remember, or just to feel? The smoke rises, and within it, the soul either dissolves into silence or clings to the echo of its name. There are places where smoke does not mean escape, but communion, where breath becomes offering, where the fire kindled in a clay pipe is not for pleasure, but for presence. Among the Rastafari, the herb is not a hobby, it is holy. They do not call it weed, they call it Ganja, the healing of the nations, the green sacrament, the gift of Jah. And when they gather, they do not light up in isolation, drowning out the world in silence. They gather in circles. They call them reasoning sessions. And this is where the herb reveals its truth. In these circles, there is no hierarchy, no preacher, no pulpit, only the word, spoken, past, reflected. The smoke moves in rhythm with the voice, a puff, a pause, a truth. And in that flow, something ancient awakens. They speak not to be heard, but to uncover, to peel back the noise of the world and meet themselves and each other without disguise. This is not intoxication, it is invocation. The reasoning is a ritual. The Ganja is incense. The circle becomes a cathedral without walls. And Yah, the living God, listens from within. Born in the soil of resistance, Rastafari was never just a religion. It was a rebellion of the spirit against empire, against oppression, against every system that told the soul it was small. And in this rebellion, the herb became a symbol, not of escape, but of sacred defiance. Haile Selassie since the Lion of Judah was seen not just as a man, but as a living echo of prophecy. And the herb, the bridge between the ancient promises and the modern struggle. But even here, there are rules unspoken. A man who smokes alone, without reflection, without prayer, is not a mystic. He is a wanderer. For Rastafari, the power of Ganja comes from alignment, from intention. The heart must be clean. The mind must be open. The smoke must be lifted, not for numbness, but for wisdom. Because the herb amplifies whatever is inside. If the soul is confused, the smoke will deepen the fog. If the soul is clear, the smoke becomes clarity. As the book of Revelation says, the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. But healing does not happen in haste. It happens in rhythm, in breath, in presence. The herb is sacred when the hands that hold it are clean with purpose. And so, the Rastafari teach by living. Not in temples, but in gardens. Not with dogma, but with discipline. They do not chase visions. They do not worship the plant. They let it guide them gently towards something deeper, a remembering. And in that sacred circle, beneath the stars, within the drumbeat of the heart, you begin to understand. It was never about getting high. It was about getting home. They called it a gift, a plant of peace, a key to vision. But what if its real power is not to show the heavens, but to reflect the soul? Cannabis doesn't create truth. It doesn't invent emotion. It reveals. It peels away the mask. And what it reveals, most are not ready to see. This is why some smile and others tremble. Why laughter comes in one breath and paranoia the next. It is not the herb that shifts. It is the mirror it holds. Carl Jung, the mystic psychologist, once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." This plant does not offer comfort. It offers a confrontation. Behind the smoke, the mirrors begin to rise. And suddenly, you are not looking at the world. You are looking at yourself. The anxieties, the forgotten grief, the impulses you've silenced with distractions, the questions you've buried beneath years of noise. The mask of the persona begins to dissolve. And what remains is raw, unfiltered, true. You are no longer in control of what stays hidden. The gatekeeper has stepped aside, and the shadow emerges. In mystic traditions, from the Sufis to the Taoists, this shadow is not evil. It is the unintegrated. It is the part of you that you never invited to the table. Fear of judgment, repressed trauma, unlived desires. The plant calls these fragments forth, not to punish you, but to ask, can you face what you've hidden from? This is not the ecstasy of mysticism. This is the crucible, the breaking down before becoming whole. In Dion Fortune's writings on psychic defense, she warns that in altered states, without grounding, without guidance, your energy field becomes porous, unstable. Entities, ideas, even your own unresolved energies find their way in, not because the plant is demonic, but because you are unguarded. It's not the herb that opens the door. You do. The plant just removes the locks. And so you sit, breathing in smoke that smells of ancient rites. But instead of peace, you feel the pressure. Not from outside, from within. The test has begun. For some, the herb amplifies creativity. For others, it awakens fear. But both are illusions, if unprocessed. Because if insight does not lead to transformation, it becomes stagnation. This is the danger, not the plant, but the pretense that we are using it consciously, when in truth, it's using us to reveal the cracks in our own soul. And yet, this mirror is not cruel. It is a gift, wrapped in smoke and silence. If you are willing to see, if you are willing to listen, if you are willing to stay, because truth doesn't shout in visions, it whispers from the reflection in your own eyes. The question is never, will cannabis show you something? The question is, will you be brave enough to look? They told us it was gentle, that it could calm the chaos, that it was safe, that it was sacred. But they forgot to tell us something far more important, that this plant, this ancient ally, doesn't bring peace. It magnifies what's already there. Cannabis doesn't create your reality. It stretches it, widens it, pulls it apart like fabric until you're wrapped in your own frequencies. And some people don't like what they find, because cannabis is not a bomb. It is an amplifier, a magnifying glass to the soul. This is why one person melts into serenity and another sinks into anxiety. Same strain, same dose, same flame, but different soul. The Taoists knew this. They wrote of cannabis with reverence, yes, but also with warning. In the biographies of immortals, ancient texts speak of how cannabis was combined with ginseng to awaken dreams and prolong life, but only for those in balance, in harmony, because when qi, life force, is fragmented, the plant only intensifies the fragmentation. It doesn't heal confusion. It echoes it, like striking a bell. It will vibrate with the note that's already there. And so the question becomes, what frequency are you vibrating in? If you bring fear, it will grow louder. If you bring peace, it will expand. If you bring anger, it will catch fire. The plant doesn't discriminate. It reflects, it absorbs, and then it shows you yourself. On loudspeakers, indigenous shamans speak of plant spirits, energies that don't just alter perception, but enter a dialogue with the user. But only when the user is listening, when they come with humility, preparation, intention, because intention is the steering wheel of the spiritual vehicle. Without it, the journey has no direction. In sacred rites, the use of cannabis was paired with fasting, chanting, prayer, solitude. These were not accessories, they were anchors. They tethered the user to something deeper, so that when the veil lifted, they wouldn't drown in what came through. But in today's world, that structure is gone. The rituals are lost. The sacred has become casual. And so we light the herb with chaos in our minds and wonder why the peace never stays. We smoke in moments of stress, moments of pain, moments of boredom. But cannabis is not a bandage, it is a megaphone. And when you whisper through it, the soul screams back. This is why so many feel a fog. Not because the plant is numbing, but because their own unresolved energy is now multiplied. Too loud to ignore, too scattered to navigate. And yet, this is the hidden mercy, because if it reveals the chaos, it also offers the chance to face it, to slow down, to look inward, to ask not, what is the plant doing to me? But what did I bring into the ritual? Energy is never created, only transformed. And in the presence of cannabis, it becomes undeniable. So before the puff, ask yourself, what am I carrying? What thoughts? What fears? What memories are whispering in the background of my silence? because this plant will not silence them. It will raise their volume until you can no longer pretend they're not there. That is the test, not of the plant, but of you. The amplifier is on. Are you ready to hear your own frequency? They said it was relaxing, that it would calm the nerves, quiet the noise, still the mind. But what if the stillness was never empty? What if, in that quiet, something stirs? Anxiety, paranoia, a creeping sense of exposure, as if your soul is standing under a light too bright to lie beneath. These aren't side effects, they are revelations. And the source is not the plant, it is you. Carl Jung called it the shadow. The unacknowledged, the unseen, the parts of ourselves we exile to the basement of our psyche, not because they are evil, but because they are uncomfortable. Fear, shame, desire, old pain, ancient wounds carried through generations. And when we smoke, when the ego softens, when the boundaries blur, the door to that basement creaks open. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But fate has many disguises, and sometimes it wears a cloud of smoke, because cannabis does not create the shadow, it invites it into the room. The spiritual traditions knew this long before psychology had a name for it. In the mystical texts of Kabbalah, the Qiliffoth are described, shells, husks, layers that surround divine light, created from imbalance, not evil by nature, but twisted by neglect. The same idea appears in Taoism. A body out of harmony becomes a house of distorted qi. And in that distortion, cannabis acts like a mirror that doesn't lie. It reflects what you refuse to see. Have you ever felt, after smoking, like your thoughts were watching you instead of the other way around? Like you were suddenly naked before yourself? Not physically, but spiritually? This is the unveiling, and for many, it's terrifying, because we mistake calm for safety. But cannabis doesn't always bring calm. Sometimes it brings confrontation, that inner tightness, that racing heart, that whisper of dread. It's not the plant, it's the part of you that hasn't been met, hasn't been healed, hasn't been named. Jung said that confronting the shadow is the first step toward wholeness. But no one tells you how loud the shadow can be when the filters fall away. And cannabis, it removes the filters. In altered states, the psyche becomes porous, software permeable, and everything you buried begins to rise. The occultist Dion Fortune warned that these moments of heightened sensitivity also open doorways, not just to higher states, but to lower ones too. The emotional breaches, as she called them, become food for what lies beneath. So when the fear creeps in, when you feel eyes watching from inside your own mind, understand, this is not punishment, it is initiation. The ego would rather escape. Blame the strain, blame the plant, but the soul knows better. It knows this is an opportunity, not to numb, but to witness, because what rises in the smoke was already waiting in the silence. The plant just turned the lights on. So if your cannabis journey brings darkness, don't run, sit, breathe, listen, because within that darkness is a doorway, and through that doorway waits your true self, whole, unafraid, finally ready to be seen. They say the veil becomes thinner, that when the smoke swirls, what is hidden begins to breathe, not just within us, but around us. The mind is not the only thing cannabis opens. It's the field, the etheric shield, the subtle energy body we all carry. that invisible skin between soul and spirit, between the self and everything else. Dion Fortune called it the aura, a psychic membrane. And in altered states, she warned, that membrane weakens. And when it weakens, things get in. Not just thoughts, not just visions, but currents, presences, entities. Most people laugh at that idea because we've been taught that the world is only physical, that only what can be touched is real. But those who've traveled, those who've seen the spaces between dreams and daylight, know otherwise. In her seminal work, Psychic Self-Defense, Fortune wrote this: when consciousness falters, entities from lower regions may draw near, feeding off the emotional breaches exposed. It's not superstition, it's spiritual physics. Just as a cut in the skin lets in bacteria, a tear in the aura, created by trauma, stress, or chemical alteration, becomes an opening, and the lower astral is always listening. It's not about demons in the way religion imagines. It's about frequency, resonance, unintegrated energy. Because cannabis, especially when used without grounding, can stretch the field open. But if the inner space is not aligned, what enters may not be light. This is why ancient traditions paired every plant with preparation. Fasting, prayer, silence, protection. The Sufis knew it. The shamans knew it. The Taoist alchemists knew it. Cannabis was never meant to be consumed casually. It was a sacrament, a ritual key, not just unlocking the mind, but inviting spirits to the table. And who arrives at that table depends entirely on the condition of the host. Some say after smoking, they feel seen, not by people, but by something else, something watching from within the dream. Familiar, foreign, intimate, yet strange. These aren't hallucinations. They are perceptions sharpened, the noise of ego turned down, and the signal of the unseen turned up. If your auric field is full of chaos, unresolved trauma, suppressed emotion, that signal may attract the wrong kind of attention, like a lighthouse without a captain, flashing light with no map, no compass, no guardrail, and some of the things drawn to that light aren't there to guide you, they're there to feed. This is why so many report intrusive thoughts, nightmares, sudden mood shifts, a sense of being watched or followed or drained, because the etheric body, once torn open, takes time to close, and if we don't know how to tend it, it remains wide, vulnerable, raw. Cannabis is a doorway, but doorways swing both ways. And not every visitor has your healing in mind. Dion Fortune didn't write for popularity. She wrote for protection. She wrote because she had seen too many seekers, too many mystics, too many gifted sensitives fall into madness, not from what they found, but from what found them. The aura is your boundary. The field is your fortress. And cannabis, for all its sacred potential, is a blade. It can cut through illusion, or it can open wounds. The choice is in how you prepare, how you guard, how you walk through the space. That is no longer just yours, because once the field is open, you are not alone. They call it a bad trip, the racing heart, the feeling of losing control, the sudden spiral into anxiety, paranoia, fear. But what if it's not a malfunction of the mind? What if it's a cleansing of the soul? Cannabis, like any entheogen, doesn't merely relax or elevate. It reveals, and sometimes what it reveals isn't cosmic beauty or divine oneness. Sometimes it's the wreckage we buried, those racing thoughts. Maybe they were always there, just muffled beneath the hum of daily noise, that panic rising from the chest. Maybe it's the echo of wounds unspoken, pain unprocessed, shame left to rot in the basement of the psyche. In ancient rites, purification was never gentle. It was fierce. It stripped away the masks. It demanded confrontation, not comfort. Smoke was used not to escape, but to invoke, and sometimes to exorcise. What if the bad trip is the soul-vomiting poison it has carried for lifetimes? The shaking, the tears, the paranoia, not a problem to fix, but a purge, a sacred collapse, a descent into the very hell that must be walked through before resurrection. Carl Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain," and cannabis, under the right or wrong conditions, can be a brutal midwife to that awakening, because it doesn't lie, it doesn't sugarcoat, it dissolves the wall between your curated persona and the chaos behind it. And in that sacred exposure, something happens. We feel naked, seen, sometimes for the very first time, and in that rawness, we often flee. We call it a bad experience. We vow to never touch the plant again. But what if? What if it wasn't the plant at all? What if it was the mirror it held up? And what if that moment of panic was your spirit trying to scream out, "Finally, finally, you saw me. Finally, you stopped pretending." Shamans in the Amazon don't flinch when the ceremony brings vomiting, crying, convulsing. They call it la limpieza, the cleanse. They expect the darkness before the light. Yet in the West, when cannabis triggers discomfort, we label it a malfunction. We fear it, suppress it, run from it, when maybe we should have stayed, breathed, listened. Because if the ego is what breaks during the trip, then maybe it was the ego that needed breaking. There are no shortcuts in the inner journey, but there are catalysts, and cannabis, for all its gentle reputation, can be one of the most unforgiving. It opens the door not only to light, but to what's been rotting in the shadows. So next time you hear someone speak of a bad trip, pause and wonder, was it a failure or the beginning of something sacred? Once, the plant was lit in temples, smoke rising not as entertainment, but as invocation. There were chants, there were offerings, there was silence, and above all, there was intention. But now, that same plant is rolled in convenience store paper, laughed over in Netflix comedies, marketed with neon fonts and TikTok dances. What happened? How did the sacrament become a meme? Modernity took the sacred and made it a trend. We didn't destroy the temple, we commercialized it. And that was far more effective. In ancient rites, from Vedic India to Taoist China to Sufi gatherings in Persia, cannabis was used with ceremony. It had a role, it had a context, it had limits. It was never about escaping reality. It was about expanding perception within a moral and energetic framework. But when colonialism arrived, it didn't just steal land. It stole language, it stole ritual, it stole meaning. Cannabis was criminalized in the West, but not because of its danger, because of its power, because of its roots, because it couldn't be separated from the mysticism of the people who carried it. Fast forward, now it's legal, but also soulless, marketed as lifestyle, not liturgy. We wear the leaf as an accessory. We joke about being stoned. We package it in boutique jars with gold labels and sell it in dispensaries that look like spas. And we call that progress. But what we've done is extract the plant from its spiritual DNA. This is spiritual extractivism, taking what is sacred and hollowing it out, just like we did with yoga, just like we did with crystals, just like we did with cacao and ayahuasca and sage. We take the outer form and abandon the inner purpose. The result? A generation surrounded by sacred tools, but starving for sacred context. We light up, but forget to listen. We consume, but forget to honor. We seek peace, but refuse preparation. The old cultures knew a plant isn't sacred because it feels good. It's sacred because it connects you to the mystery. And the mystery does not entertain. It tests. But tests require readiness, ritual, an elder, a structure. Modernity removed all of that. Now cannabis is everywhere, but nowhere sacred. We've created a spirituality of convenience, one that doesn't ask for discipline or sacrifice or silence, just dopamine. And yet, deep inside, many of us feel the loss. We know something's missing. We feel the ghost of the temple, flickering behind the smoke. The memory of a time when a puff wasn't casual, but a prayer. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to remember. Because if the plant is still sacred, then it's we who must return, not to the substance, but to the silence that once surrounded it. It feels peaceful, software, like silence after a storm, like stillness in a crowded world. You light it, inhale, and for a moment, the noise dissolves. But what kind of peace is that? If it's borrowed, not earned, not cultivated, but rented from a plant. This is the aesthetic of escape. And escape, when disguised as peace, is seductive. Inhale again. And suddenly, the world seems manageable. Your thoughts slow. The edges blur. Everything feels okay, but beneath that calm, nothing has changed. The wound is still there. The avoidance still lingers. The question still unanswered. Cannabis, when used without intention, gives the illusion of peace, without the presence of healing. It wraps pain in velvet instead of removing it. It dims the lights instead of showing the way. It numbs, just enough, so you stop looking. But numbness isn't clarity, and stillness without awareness isn't peace. It's sedation. True calm doesn't come from what enters your lungs. It comes from what leaves your soul. The fear, the grasping, the story of not being enough. Cannabis, used with sacred context, can open the door to that kind of work. But without the container, without the ritual, without the discernment, it becomes something else. It becomes an emotional lullaby, a fog that whispers, "Don't worry, don't look, don't feel, just stay here." And we listen, because it's easier than the pain of facing the shadow, easier than the work of integration, easier than silence without substances. But here is the danger. What feels like calm can actually be stagnation. We confuse stillness with sedation. We confuse relief with resolution. We confuse pause with progress. And over time, we stop growing. Creativity stalls. Discipline fades. Presence becomes blurry. The path becomes a circle. Because if the silence you feel comes only after smoke, then it isn't yours. It was given, and what is given can be taken. This is why ancient traditions insisted on preparation, why fasting came before communion, why breathwork came before ingestion, why ritual came before revelation. because the sacred is not what quiets the noise, it's what transforms it. In the Taoist texts, they warned, amplify the qi of an unprepared body, and you amplify its chaos. And isn't that what we do? We amplify the calm without rooting it. We amplify the stillness without understanding it. We wear peace like an accessory, but we have no idea how to build it, to live it, to sustain it without help. And that is not spiritual growth. It is spiritual dependency. So we must ask, when you light the herb, are you entering yourself or escaping yourself? Are you practicing presence or postponing it? Because true peace, the kind that transforms, doesn't come from something. It comes through you. It is born in stillness, in shadow, in the quiet discipline of the soul. And no substance can give you that. It can only remind you that it's already within. There is a kind of clarity that shines, but never warms. A kind of brilliance that dazzles, but never guides. A light that flickers in the mind, but never reaches the soul. We call it insight. We call it vision. But sometimes it is only illusion, dressed in the language of awakening. Cannabis, like many entheogens, can open the floodgates of perception. It can unravel the edges of the known, inviting you to peer beyond the veil. Symbols emerge, patterns dance, synchronicities bloom like wildflowers after rain. And in that moment, it feels profound, like the universe whispered your name, like truth is pouring through your veins. But here is the question no one wants to ask. If the insight doesn't change you, was it ever truth? If the vision doesn't translate into action, if the wisdom fades with the high, if the soul returns unchanged to its old wounds, what was gained? Nothing. Only the feeling of transformation, not the real thing. This is the false light. In occult traditions, especially the Kabbalistic tree of life, there's a sephira called Hod. It represents intellect, mental brilliance, language, thought. But there's a warning encoded in its depths. That Hod can become a trap, a realm of empty mirrors, where the ego mistakes reflection for revelation, where the mind, intoxicated with symbols, believes it has seen the divine, when it has only seen itself dressed in metaphor. Many modern seekers dwell here. They smoke, they meditate, they write poetry, they speak of downloads and energies, but their relationships remain broken, their patterns unchanged, their peace conditional. They mistake emotional charge for inner work. They confuse poetic language with ethical embodiment. They equate intensity with truth, but intensity isn't the same as clarity, and clarity isn't the same as liberation. Psychedelic experiences, especially those induced by cannabis, can become echo chambers, loops of revelation with no resolution, glimpses of the mountain, but never the climb. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there is a word, siddhis, powers, abilities that may arise on the path, visions, voices, a sense of expanded perception. But the warning is clear. Siddhis are distractions, temptations of the spiritual ego. They may sparkle like diamonds, but they are not the treasure. They are tests. Cannabis can be a CD machine. It can show you glimpses of a higher world without building the discipline to reach it. It can whisper cosmic metaphors that change nothing when the high fades, because the path is not revealed by what you see when your eyes are closed. It is revealed by how you walk when your eyes are open, how you respond when you're hurt, how you show up when you're tired, how you love when your shadow is triggered. And none of that can be taught by a plant, only revealed, and only if you're ready to do something with what you've seen. The false light offers comfort. The true path offers confrontation. One fades, the other transforms. So ask yourself, when cannabis shows you something, do you act on it, or do you only feel it? Because if the light does not change how you live, then it is not the light, it is only a flicker, a flash, a dream mistaken for awakening. And that is the most dangerous illusion of all. There is a sensation, a soft glow that comes when the smoke curls in the air. The world slows, thoughts stretch, tension melts like wax, and in that stillness, you feel everything. The music feels deeper, the sunset eternal. The moment feels sacred, but nothing moves. You sit, you breathe, you feel, and the hours pass like mist. This is the trap. Chronic cannabis use doesn't silence the soul. It muffles it in velvet. It wraps the edges of longing in softness. It gives you the feeling of peace, without the action that builds it, and slowly, invisibly, you begin to stagnate. The ideas are there, the insights keep coming, but the body does not rise. The mission stays dormant. The dreams gather dust. It is the illusion of evolution. It feels spiritual, but it is not growth. Many chronic users report it. A sense of being emotionally full, creatively alive, spiritually tuned in, but unable to move forward, as if the river is wide but frozen. In Kabbalistic mysticism, there is a term for this. Klipo, shells, energetic husks that form around truths we are not yet ready to integrate. Wisdom without embodiment, insight without transformation, light trapped inside a cage of inertia. And cannabis, used without intention, can feed these shells. You begin to feel like you're evolving because you're feeling so much. But spiritual feeling is not the same as spiritual living. As Alan Watts once warned, the danger of the psychedelic is not what it shows you, but the temptation to return for the show, instead of doing the work the show reveals. That's what happens with chronic use. Cannabis opens doors, but the user keeps stepping into the same room, again and again, feeling more, doing less, believing they are journeying when they are only pacing in circles. The spiritual ego loves this. It crafts language. It speaks of vibrations. It posts quotes about transcendence. But the laundry isn't done. The relationships are unhealed. The purpose is postponed. Because feeling isn't the point. Becoming is. And becoming requires movement, friction, challenge, engagement with life, not retreat from it. The Taoist sages knew this well. They spoke of qi, the life force, as something that flows only when balanced with action. Too much yin, inward, passive energy, leads to stagnation, and cannabis, when overused, is the yin river flooding the valley. Still, cool, overwhelming. The result? Disconnection disguised as depth, passivity masked as peace. So you must ask yourself, are you using the plant to open the way? Or are you building a tent inside the threshold? Are you moving? Or are you medicating? Because there is a kind of spirituality that sedates the soul, a warm cocoon, where nothing hurts, but nothing changes. And that is not peace. It is paralysis in disguise. There is a difference, a subtle but sacred line, between ritual and recreation, between smoke that rises in prayer and smoke that drifts from boredom. It is not the plant that defines the path. It is the presence or absence of intention. When cannabis is used alone, without rhythm, without reverence, without structure, it becomes something else. Not evil, not useless, but misaligned. Because sacred plants require sacred context, across cultures, across centuries, across civilizations. The most powerful plants were never consumed lightly. They were offered, they were prepared, they were invited. In the Rastafari tradition, the herb is not a tool of escape. It is a sacrament, smoked during reasoning, collective gatherings of prayer, philosophy, and chant. The circle matters. The silence between words matters. The listening matters. Because the herb is not a toy. It is a bridge. And no one walks a sacred bridge alone. In the Taoist texts, cannabis was part of formulas. Never solo, never careless. Combined with ginseng, reishi, foti. To align the body with the flow of qi. Everything mattered. The time, the breath, the ritual. In the Amazon, powerful plants are never consumed outside ceremony. The ayahuasca is prepared with prayers. The tobacco is blown with intention. Even the silence between songs is a sacrament, because these cultures know something the modern world has forgotten. Context is the container. Without the container, the sacred leaks. Without structure, the energy frays. Recreation is not evil, but it is not the same. Lighting a joint in a car while scrolling your phone is not the same as lighting sacred fire at dawn, chanting the names of your ancestors. And yet, this is what modernity has done. It has stripped the structure, ripped the roots, and packaged the plant in neon labels and glass jars. Cannabis, once a whisper of the divine, is now a brand, an aesthetic, a vibe. The modern user rarely asks, who held this plant before me? Who spoke to it? What story does it carry? Instead, we ask, indica or sativa? And the portal begins to close. There's a reason sacred use was always collective, because the ego dissolves in the circle, because the ritual reminds you, this is not about you alone. It's about something older, something larger. The Zohar, the mystical book of Kabbalah, speaks of sacred vessels. That divine light must be held in form, or else it shatters. The same is true here. Without sacred form, the prayer, the chant, the rhythm, the plant's power collapses into sensation, pleasure, distraction, a moment instead of a movement. And so we must ask, are you using cannabis as incense in a temple? Or are you using it like perfume sprayed on silence? Are you entering communion? Or just chasing calm? Because ritual is not superstition. It is alignment. It is the spine of the sacred. Without it, even the most divine medicine becomes diluted, diminished, drained of its essence, and a plant meant to awaken becomes just another lullaby. Long before the glow of rolling papers lit dark bedrooms, before cannabis was whispered about on street corners or debated in sanitized labs, it danced in circles, not alone, never alone, but among others. In Africa, the Amazon, the Caribbean, the spirit of the plant was never summoned without a song. It was never inhaled in silence, but woven into rhythm. The drum was the first container, the heartbeat of the collective, a sacred pulse reminding each soul that they are not a lone wanderer in the cosmos, but part of a constellation. Among the Bantu peoples, cannabis was not recreation. It was invitation. It called the ancestors. It marked births, deaths, rites of passage. At funerals, its smoke rose like a stairway. a fragrant signal for the soul to begin its ascent, not in solitude, but carried by the chants of the living. Their grief became fuel for the plant's purpose. In the Congo, elders burned cannabis during storytelling rites, where myth became memory, and memory became medicine. The smoke mingled with the words, lifting them, twisting them into vision. Among the Shipibo of the Amazon, the sacred plants were not just chemical compounds. They were beings, spirits, teachers, and every teacher required a classroom. That classroom was the circle, a place where breath was synchronized, where eyes stayed open, where silence was not empty, but watched over, guided, protected by songs, by rattles, by the presence of lineage. Cannabis, when used, was braided into dieta. Ritual purification, fasting, vocal silence, and intention. No plant stood alone. It was paired with mapacho, grounded by tobacco, anchored by ayahuasca, tempered by prayer. And when the smoke rose, it did not isolate, it united. Every puff became a communal breath, every breath a whisper from the unseen. In Afro-Caribbean traditions like Candomblé and Umbanda, the herb might not take center stage like it did in Rastafari, but the concept was identical. Every plant has an axe, a spiritual current, an energetic personality. To light the wrong herb in the wrong setting is to play a sacred drum with no understanding of the orisha it calls. It is not harmless. It is not neutral. It is noise in a temple. The wisdom of the drum circle isn't about aesthetic. It's about safety, direction, containment. Because when you open a portal, you don't just walk through it. You invite something to walk through you. And when the rhythm is lost, when the sacred container is replaced with silence and scrolling, the plant, no matter how ancient, loses its compass. It's not cannabis that connects us. It's what surrounds it. The chants, the soil, the stories, the hands that pass the pipe, not to forget, but to remember. This was the wisdom of the circle. Not to get high, but to stay grounded. Not to leave the world behind, but to return with something real to give. The sacred never arrives alone. It demands a witness, a guide, a rhythm, a story. No true ceremony begins in silence, and none ends in isolation. Because transformation, real transformation, is never a solo act. The plant needs presence, not just intention, but reflection. Not just smoke, but structure. In every culture where cannabis held spiritual weight, you'll find the same thread woven through. There is always someone watching. Not to control, but to protect. Not to judge, but to witness the crossing of a threshold. The guide doesn't lead you to the divine. They hold the lamp while you walk your path. In Vedic tradition, even the Sardu never smokes alone. The chillum is passed with reverence, not just a pipe, but a torch of intention. Boom Shiva, they whisper, invoking the force of destruction and rebirth with each inhale. Because without ritual, it's just smoke. In Rastafari rites, the reasoning session is not a group high. It is collective liturgy, word, herb, rhythm, all woven. Each participant becomes mirror and mirror holder. You do not drift. You are seen, heard, reflected back in prayerful silence. In Taoist alchemical circles, herbs are consumed only after the breath is mastered, after the chai is stable, and always, always under the watchful eye of an elder. Because the subtle body is no playground, ceremony holds this ancient principle. When you alter your state, you open a gate, and what walks through depends on the frame. A sacred story anchors the vision. A chant grounds the energy. A rhythm guides the movement of inner tides. A guide holds space for collapse and rebirth. Modernity calls this overkill, extra, outdated. But what they forget is that the soul doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in stories, in sound and gesture. And when the plant stirs those deep, ancient languages, we need someone fluent to translate. We need a witness, because what you see in those moments of opening, in the stillness after the smoke clears, may be so unfamiliar, so raw, so unfiltered, that without another soul to say, I see it too, you may doubt what you saw at all. The great mystery is not meant to be consumed. It's meant to be honored, processed, integrated. A lone user can glimpse the door, but a circle with rhythm, a guide with wisdom, a ceremony held with care. That is what helps you walk through it and come back whole. The plant is old. It remembers the temples, the songs, the firelight flickering on sacred walls. It does not want to be used. It wants to be met. And to meet it well, you must be held. The sacred cannot float. It must be held. By words, by rhythm, by myth. Culture is the container. And when the container breaks, even the sacred leaks. Cannabis once lived inside a vast architecture of meaning. Stories held it, songs encircled it, symbols gave it shape. But modernity ripped the roots from the soil and expected the fruit to still nourish. What was once sacrament has become aesthetic. What was once ritual is now recreation. We cannot call it sacred if it no longer carries weight. In ancient India, the plant was Shiva's breath. In Taoist scrolls, a dreaming herb used only after years of internal cultivation. In Rasta circles, Ganja still dances with Yah's presence. But outside of those frames, without the fire, the chant, the mythos, it becomes something else. You see, it's not just the plant that changes, it's the field around it. Remove the symbols, and what remains is not power, but potency without direction. Cannabis becomes like a compass with no north. It points everywhere, which means it points nowhere. Because sacredness is not about the substance itself. It's about the story we wrap it in. When the Lakota light the sacred pipe, it is not tobacco that makes it holy. It is the prayer that precedes it, the lineage that surrounds it, the way it's handed, never with the left, always with the right. These things matter. They are not superstition. They are scaffolding. They are the invisible architecture of reverence. Today, cannabis is smoked to Netflix, to TikTok, to numb, to pass time, to vibe. But a vibe is not a vision. You cannot summon the divine in a room without silence, without story, without sacrifice. Sacred plants demand sacred space, and that space must be cultural, not just personal. An individual may revere the plant, but it is the culture that keeps the reverence alive. The language, the metaphors, the shared silence. Without that, even divinity becomes disposable. And cannabis, once a key to other realms, becomes a forgotten relic of spiritual extractivism. The West took the plant, but not the prayer, took the smoke, but not the chant, took the high, but not the humility. And this is how it became hollow, a shell of sacredness, sold back to us as rebellion. But no matter how hollow it becomes, the core is still there, waiting for the myth to return, waiting for someone, anyone, to treat it like a mystery again. The question is not whether the plant still holds power. The question is, Does our culture still know how to hold the sacred? The plant opens the door, but it does not tell you how to walk through it. It does not anchor you. It does not wait for you to be ready. And a doorway, without grounding, can become a trap. Portals, the true ones, are never stable on their own. They require the user to stabilize themselves. The Sufis knew this. The Sardu knew this. Even the Taoist alchemists whispered the warning. Enter only after the fire inside is stilled, because cannabis does not discriminate. It does not scan your chakras or check your heart. It amplifies. It reveals. It expands whatever is already inside. And what happens? When the soul enters a wider space, without knowing how to stand, it wobbles, it spirals, it falls. Modern seekers, without ritual, without lineage, step into the sacred as tourists. And sacred spaces, they are not built for tourists. You see, opening is easy. A single breath, a single puff, and the veil begins to thin. But anchoring is the work of a lifetime. To open without anchoring is like sailing without stars. There is movement dash, but no direction. You drift, and sometimes you drown. In yogic traditions, this is the warning behind the siddhis. The psychic powers that come too soon. They dazzle the mind, they inflate the ego, and suddenly the seeker believes they've arrived. But they've only become lost in a more beautiful maze. Cannabis can bring visions, can bring insights, can bring waves of truth that flood the soul. But without preparation, without a still point inside, those truths are unholdable. They slip through trembling fingers. This is why the ancients fasted, why they chanted, why they purified the body before touching the plant. It wasn't about morality. It was about momentum, about making sure the energy inside them could match the energy they were about to meet. Today, we light the joint, we open the portal, and we fall through without knowing how to land. Then we wonder why we feel ungrounded, why we float but never rise, why we see so much but remember so little. Because without anchoring, there is no integration, no harvest from the journey, only a dizzy return. We were not meant to run through spiritual doors. We were meant to bow before them, to breathe, to still the body, to hold our inner fire like a compass, so when the veil parts, we are not caught off guard. We are not overwhelmed. We are not consumed. To walk through the portal with reverence, that is the true journey. Because awakening, without anchoring, is not awakening. It's fragmentation wearing a sacred mask, and that mask eventually falls. The body is not just flesh, it is breath, it is vibration, it is light, and beneath the skin, beyond muscle, beyond blood, there is the subtle field, the aura, the unseen atmosphere of the soul. Mystics across culture speak of it. Taoist Qi, Indian prana, Hebrew ruach, all whispering the same secret. There is more to you than meets the eye. This field, this aura, is not just metaphor. It is memory. It is history. It holds the emotional residue of your life. It absorbs. It reflects. It protects. But only when it is strong. Only when it is tended. And cannabis, sacred, powerful, unpredictable, pierces that field. It doesn't knock, it flows in, stirs everything, lights up the subtle channels like electric veins. For some, it brings sensitivity, color, emotion, vision. But for others, it brings overwhelm. Because when the aura is already fragile, fractured by trauma, clouded by confusion, thinned by modern living. The plant doesn't heal it, it floods it. Imagine a circuit board, delicate, precise. Now imagine overcharging it, too much current, too fast. The board doesn't light up, it burns. This is auric overload, and it's more common than we think. People say, I got too high. I felt anxious. My thoughts wouldn't stop. But it's not just in the mind. It's in the field. The energetic container that holds the soul was not built for unfiltered intensity, not without training, not without grounding. Practitioners of Reiki, Kundalini, and ceremonial magic have all spoken of this, that cannabis stimulates the higher chakras, third eye, crown, while often bypassing the lower ones, the root, the anchor, the seat of stability. And so we ascend too quickly, not through growth, but through force, and the soul loses its center. This is why some report strange dreams, unwanted visions, sudden emotional collapse. It's not because the plant is dark, it's because the field is unready. The aura is not a toy, it is an instrument, and sacred instruments must be tuned, cleansed, strengthened. Without this, any external stimulant, even a sacred one, can become dangerous. Imagine trying to play a harp in a hurricane. That's what happens when a fragile aura meets a powerful plant. Sound is lost in the storm, light becomes distortion, and what was meant to awaken only disorients. The ancients knew this. This is why they built rituals to anchor the soul, salt baths, breathwork, chants that bind energy, movements that seal the body, because a portal without protection is a risk. And cannabis opens wide. So ask yourself, before the puff, before the prayer, before the plunge into spirit, is your field whole? Is your aura ready to receive? Or will the sacred light flicker too fast and leave you chasing shadows in your own house of mirrors? In the spiritual path, more light is not always the answer. Sometimes the soul must first learn to hold the light it already has. Only then can the door open without breaking what's inside. Energy is not silent. It speaks, it hums, it calls to itself. This is the law of resonance, not belief, not metaphor, but law. Everything you carry, thoughts, emotions, desires, fears, vibrates, and in that vibration, you become a beacon, a signal, a frequency in motion. The universe doesn't speak language, it speaks energy, and energy in the right conditions magnifies itself. Enter cannabis, a plant not just of the earth, but of subtle dimensions, a herb that doesn't just enter the body, but awakens its field. Used with reverence, it can clarify that signal dash, heighten intuition, expand vision, tune the inner instrument to the frequency of truth. But used without intention, it doesn't discriminate. It simply amplifies. The frequency of the user becomes the fuel, and the law of resonance begins to echo louder. If you're carrying peace, you may feel divine silence. If you're carrying longing, you may feel the ache of eternity. But if you're carrying fear, shame, confusion, you may feel them multiplied. Cannabis doesn't create frequencies, it reveals them, enhances them, draws them into the open, and once open, they attract. This is why many report synchronicities while high, dreamlike experiences, cosmic coincidences. But this is also why others report paranoia, energetic intrusion, the feeling of being watched, or followed by something unseen. The plant, in its sacred function, opens the door. But what comes through that door isn't chosen by the plant. It's chosen by your resonance, like attracts like. And this is not only internal, it's relational, it's spatial. Your vibration, while elevated through cannabis, can ripple into your environment. It can draw energies from others, from memory, from the unseen. You become a transmitter and a receiver. And if your signal is confused, the feedback loop begins. Intensity, distortion, spiritual static. This is why the ancients never used cannabis alone. They fasted, they prayed, they cleared the vessel before igniting the flame, because the plant doesn't guide, it responds. And the law of resonance does not have mercy, it does not have morality, it only has rhythm, and that rhythm will amplify whatever beat you bring. So when you light the joint, ask not what you want to feel, ask what you're already carrying, because that is what the plant will show you. Not heaven, not hell, not illusion, just you, multiplied, resonating, returning, not because the plant is sacred, but because you are, and sacred things always echo. There are things that don't knock. They don't announce themselves, don't wear names, don't show up with horns and fangs. They slip in when the veil is thin, when the mind is wide open, and the aura is cracked like glass. We call them energetic predators, not because they stalk us like animals, but because they feed, quietly, patiently, on what is most precious, your light. In altered states, the boundaries blur. The subtle body, normally shielded by the rhythm of waking life, becomes translucent, porous, and what was once background noise starts to hum like a siren. It is not always paranoia. Sometimes it's perception. The Sufi mystics knew this. They called it waswasa, whispers of entities that feed on doubt. In Hermetic traditions, they are known as astral remnants, fragments of consciousness disembodied and ungrounded, seeking anchor in the nearest soul. Too open, too unaware. Psychic self-defense expert Dion Fortune warned of this very moment. In her writings, she described the etheric field as both a cloak and a net. When intact, it radiates. When weakened, it pulls things in, substances, including cannabis. When used without grounding, can weaken that field, not by evil, but by exposure, like turning on a floodlight. In the middle of a dark forest, you'll see beauty, but you'll also attract eyes that were never meant to find you. Shamans from the Amazon speak of chulachaqui, spirit tricksters who approach when the mind is altered, feeding off confusion, wearing familiar faces, speaking in riddles. In Hinduism, it's the concept of bhutas, subtle entities that cling to the prana, of those whose energy is loose, untethered, distracted. You won't see them, you'll feel them. As a shift in the room, a pull in your chest, a presence when no one is there. You'll call it anxiety. You'll brush it off, but the soul knows. The aura flinches, the field contracts, and it's not always malicious. Some energies are just hungry, confused, looping, searching for warmth. But others are more precise. They know exactly what you lack, and they offer it. Peace, insight, euphoria. But the cost is subtle. You don't feel it in the moment. You feel it days later. A heaviness, a loss of clarity, dreams that leave a residue. This is not superstition. It's spiritual hygiene. It's energetic responsibility. Because when you enter altered states, You are not alone. The doors you open, they don't just let you out. They let things in. And the plant, neutral by nature, does not defend you. It only unveils you. You are the temple. You are the guard. So light the herb if you must. But do not forget, ritual was never superstition. It was a shield. And in a world filled with eyes that do not blink, a shield is not optional. It's sacred. They say the ego must die for the soul to rise, but not all deaths are permanent, and not all egos wear the same mask. Sometimes it returns, not as arrogance, not as vanity, but wrapped in incense smoke and the illusion of depth. It wears robes now, speaks softly, knows the names of gods, and calls itself awakened. This is the spiritual ego dash, the shadow born from light, the most cunning mask the mind can wear. Because when cannabis is used to dissolve the self, it doesn't always stay dissolved. The silence it brings, the insights it whispers, they feel like enlightenment, but often they're just mirrors polished with smoke. The user begins to feel wiser, more connected, more aware, but awareness without integration is just decoration. An inner peace that only arrives under the influence is not peace. It's dependency in disguise. Psychologist John Wellwood called it spiritual bypassing, the use of spiritual ideas or practices to avoid facing unresolved wounds. And cannabis, with its warmth and wonder, can make bypassing feel like transcendence. You hear someone say, "I don't need therapy. I just smoke and connect with the divine." But the divine is not a substitute for self-confrontation. And presence that arrives only after a puff is not presence, it's performance. This is how the ego rebrands itself. I'm not addicted, it says. I'm exploring higher states. But the truth is not measured in altitude, it's measured in aftermath. Does your clarity remain the next morning? Does your love deepen when no one's watching? Do you walk softer in the world, or just speak louder about it? Because the real danger of the spiritual ego isn't just self-deception. It's the way it blocks growth. It builds a temple on top of trauma, paints over wounds with visions, and calls the mask enlightenment. In altered states, the mind becomes malleable. But if it's not held in truth, if there is no discernment, no structure, the ego simply shapeshifts. It trades arrogance for aura, control for charisma. And now, it thinks it's closer to the divine than others. This illusion is harder to shatter than ignorance, because ignorance is honest. But the spiritual ego, it believes it has nothing left to learn. So cannabis, once sacred, becomes the crown of the false prophet. Not because of what it is, but because of what the ungrounded self makes of it. And that's the real risk, not paranoia, not dependence, but the echo chamber of a soul mistaking temporary transcendence for permanent awakening. The ego didn't die in the smoke, it just found a holier name. Not every addiction is chemical. Some are emotional, some are spiritual. And this one hides well, because it doesn't look like escape. It looks like awakening. It speaks the language of depth, wears the cloak of insight, and says, I'm evolving. But in truth, it is not evolution. It is intoxication with the feeling of awakening, a high not from THC, but from the illusion of growth. This is the trap few see coming. Not addiction to the plant, but addiction to what the plant makes us feel. Clarity, connection, cosmic insight, words spill out, visions unfold, ideas shimmer like constellations in the mind, and we think, this must be awakening, But awakening isn't how you feel when the smoke curls through your lungs. It's who you are when the smoke clears. Do you return clearer, kinder, more grounded? Or are you just waiting for the next session to go deep again? That's the quiet pattern. Depth becomes performance. Stillness becomes spectacle. And every high becomes a ritual of chasing. Not presence, but the illusion of it. In his talks, Alan Watts once warned, if you get the message, hang up the phone. But some never hang up. They keep calling. Not to receive, but to remember how it felt to receive. That's the danger. You start needing the sensation of being spiritual. You seek it the way others seek comfort or stimulation. And it feels noble. It feels elevated. But it's still seeking, still running from the silence of ordinary days, still fleeing from the slow, aching work of real transformation. Because real transformation is rarely euphoric. It's messy, uneven, sometimes silent for months, sometimes full of discomfort. But that doesn't sell as well as the cosmic high. So the user begins to confuse stimulation for spirituality, visions for vision, insight for integration, and the ritual becomes a loop, another session, another smoke, another feeling of being close to God. But closeness to God that depends on a plant isn't closeness. It's proximity, borrowed light. True awakening doesn't need music or incense or even cannabis. It needs one thing, presence. And presence isn't always pleasant. It's not always beautiful, but it's real. You can only stay high for so long. Eventually, you must come down. And the question is, did the awakening leave something behind? A trace, a change, a seed? Or did it vanish with the smoke? The soul knows. It always knows. When we're evolving and when we're just pretending. And the plant, it doesn't lie. It only reveals. You saw the light. You touched the mystery. You felt the pulse of the universe beat in your chest. But if nothing changed, did it matter? Enlightenment is not what you feel during the vision. It's what remains once it fades. The real test isn't how high you fly, but how gently you land. The sacred is not a spark, it is a shift. And if the shift doesn't touch your behavior, your choices, your relationships, then it was not awakening. It was tourism. Many visit the divine. Few bring it home, because home is where it counts. How you speak when angry, how you listen when tired, how you love when it's hardest. That's the ground where real spirituality grows. Not in dreams, but in discipline. Not in altered states, but in altered lives. Cannabis can open a door, yes, but it cannot walk through it for you. It cannot cook your meals with compassion. It cannot heal your grudges. It cannot hold your silence in a storm. It can only show, not change. Change is your work, your offering, your sacrifice, because transformation is not a feeling. It is a commitment, and commitment is not always euphoric. It is repetition, practice, humility. Some say, but I felt so connected, so peaceful. Good. But what did you do with that peace? Did it ripple into your life, or did it fade with the scent of the smoke? Because sacred isn't just what you feel, it's what you become. If the ceremony made you softer, but the next day you snap at your child, something was lost. If the plant showed you love, but you return to patterns of judgment, you've missed the lesson. Real integration means you change, slowly, quietly, not with fireworks, but with choices. As Ram Dass once said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Because that's the battlefield, not the mountaintop. The dinner table, the traffic jam, the awkward silence, the argument you didn't start, but chose not to finish with harm. That's where the sacred blooms. Not in visions, but in how we hold each other through the ordinary. Cannabis can be a bridge, but it is not the destination. And without integration, the bridge leads nowhere. So ask yourself, after the last puff, what remains? After the high, who are you? Because if it doesn't shape your shadow, if it doesn't ground your light, if it doesn't bring heaven down into how you treat the ones you love, then it's not enlightenment, it's performance. Integration is where the sacred proves itself, not in what you see, but in how you show up, not in what you claim, but in what you carry. And the most enlightened among us aren't the ones who talk like mystics. They're the ones who move through the world like prayer. The answer was never to abandon the plant. The sacred doesn't ask for rejection. It asks for reverence. Cannabis is not the problem. Consciousness is. The way we use it, the energy we bring, the silence we forget. This isn't a call for prohibition. It's a call for purification, a return to intention, to ritual, to soul. Because a sacred plant doesn't become sacred by itself. It becomes sacred in your hands. If your hands are clean, used without presence, it numbs. Used with presence, it reveals. And that difference is everything. So how do we begin again? Not by banning it, but by bowing to it. First, space. No more hurried hits in anxious corners. No more casual use under fluorescent lights. Reintroduce the temple. Even if that temple is a single candle, a silent room, a breath held not in fear, but in reverence. Second, fasting. Let the body speak first. Let silence cleanse the palate. No scrolling, no music, no chatter. Just the whisper of presence, the stillness before the doorway opens. Then, prayer. Not necessarily words, but a posture, a quiet offering of gratitude to the spirit of the plant. Because every power, no matter how natural, has a guardian. And guardians deserve to be greeted. This is not superstition. It's energetic hygiene. Respect does not come after effects. It comes before them, because intention is everything. A joint lit in grief will magnify sorrow. A pipe lit in presence can become a mirror of truth. So ask, why am I lighting this? To escape or to explore? To run or to return? The elders knew this. The Sardu did not smoke for fun. The Rastaman didn't light the chalice for distraction. The Taoist monk did not inhale for stimulation. Each puff was a passage. Each moment a prayer. We forgot. We turned the sacrament into content. The herb into a punchline. The sacred into a brand. But it's not too late. You can return it to the altar. You can give it back its wings, but only if you stop rushing. In the modern world, rushing is the real addiction. Even our highs are hurried. Even our healing feels urgent. But the sacred never rushes. It arrives in slowness. So if you choose to work with this plant again, slow down. Make it sacred. Speak to it as you would an elder. Sit with it like you would a fire. Ask it not what it can give you, but what it can teach you. And when the visions rise, when the insights whisper, when the mirror opens, stay still. Let it show you. And more importantly, let it change you. Because if you are not ready to be changed, you are not ready to inhale. And if you are not willing to listen, you are not worthy to light. The plant has not changed. The world has. We have. Cannabis still grows in silence, still breathes in rhythm with the earth, still unfurls its leaves to the sun, as if whispering a forgotten truth. It never lost its sacredness. We lost our ability to meet it. We came with noise, with expectation, with distraction in our pockets, and wounds we refused to look at. And still, the plant waited. It was never just a buzz. It was a breath, a presence, a test. And it's still here, waiting like a temple without a door. Open, but only to those who enter awake. Cannabis is sacred, not because it grows wild, but because it touches what's wild in you. The parts you've hidden, the parts you've buried, the pieces of soul you've left behind. It is not a toy, not a meme, not a political stance. It is an elder. And elders do not beg to be honored. They simply stop speaking when they are not heard. But the plant is still whispering to the ones who can listen. It does not demand ritual, but it responds to it. It does not require tradition, but it roots best when planted in reverence. Because without reverence, it unravels you. Not out of malice, but because that's what sacred mirrors do. They don't flatter. They reflect, and most aren't ready to see. That's why the old ones fasted, why the chants were sung, why the circle was cast, why the silence was held, not for theatrics, but for preparation, because no portal opens cleanly to the ones who carry chaos into the sacred. The plant is sacred, but only if you are. Only if you show up like a seeker, not a scavenger. You don't earn the plant's power through consumption. You earn it through clarity. You don't unlock its wisdom through frequency, but through frequency of intent. If you come to escape, you'll get illusion. If you come to listen, you may receive a glimpse. And if you come to offer, not take, you may be transformed, because the plant is waiting. It always was, through empires and edicts, through worship and war, through medicine and mockery. It's still here, in the soil, in the scent, in the stillness, waiting, not for the law to change, not for society to awaken, but for you. And when you are ready to meet it, not with craving, but with clarity, it will not disappoint, because the plant knows its purpose. The question is, do you? And now we arrive, not at the end of the path, but at the threshold. The smoke lingers, the ember fades, but the question remains, did you inhale to escape or to awaken? Did you light the joint as a torch or a distraction? Because every puff, every breath through the sacred leaf is not just an act of consumption. It is a choice to see or to stay blind. They told us cannabis was sacred, and it was. But sacredness does not survive dilution. It demands presence. The plant was never the teacher. It was the gate. And gates don't lead anywhere by themselves. They only open. The walk dash, the seeing dash, the transformation must come from you. You must meet what's on the other side. And it will not always be beauty. Sometimes it is the face you've never dared to see, the wound still trembling beneath years of suppression, the shadow you named habit, but which has always been hunger. The plant opens it, but it does not hold your hand. It does not sing you lullabies. It does not offer forgiveness, only mirrors. And some will scream at the reflection. Some will call it madness. Others will numb it with another puff, another dose, another scroll through illusion. But a few, a very rare few, will pause. They will sit in the silence, let the smoke rise, let the tears fall. And in that pause, something happens, not fireworks, not visions, but stillness, a return, to the breath, to the body, to the truth they thought they came to escape, only to discover it was what they were always seeking. The final puff is not the end. It is the unveiling of how you relate, of how you consume, of whether you will now walk deeper or turn away again. Because if cannabis is a teacher, it teaches by testing. And if it is a test, then every ritual is an answer. Every intention is a key, and every breath is a vow. So when the smoke clears, ask not what you saw, ask what you changed. When the flame burns out, ask not what you felt, ask who you became. This is the truth no culture, no market, no meme will ever tell you. The plant doesn't give you power. It reveals how you wield the power you already have. It does not promise peace. It shows you whether your peace is real or rented. And when the final puff rises to the heavens, like incense from the ancient altar, the only question that echoes in its trail is this: were you ready? Because the plant still waits, the mirror still reflects, the portal still opens. But now, you must choose whether you walk through or walk away. The ritual is over, and the real journey begins. If this journey stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Let it ripple, let it echo. Share this message with someone who's still in the smoke, still searching for the sacred. Leave a comment, not just to speak, but to reflect. Tell us what it revealed. Tell us what it questioned. Because the plant may be ancient, but the conversation is just beginning. And if you feel called to walk deeper, to explore what lies beyond the veil, subscribe. This is not just a channel. It is a temple of awakening, a gathering of seekers, a circle of souls remembering the sacred. One video at a time, one truth at a time, one breath at a time. We are the Hidden Voyage, and the voyage has just begun. SoulCreator and SoulWhisper, the Hidden Voyage.